Hi everyone, this is Farmer Shelby here, and today we're going to be talking about a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is a tool used by scientists to help make identifications. This tool can be used for absolutely anything, from plants to animals to insects to things we find at the grocery store. But today we're going to be using it to identify 6 different mushrooms that are commonly found around Whidbey Island. A dichotomous key uses observations to separate objects into different categories. Starting broad, these observations of characteristics get more and more specific until you reach a unique identification. Let's first start by learning the parts of a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key begins on the left-hand side with our most broad observations. These are going to be our largest category of all of our organisms altogether. In our case, this will be all 6 of our mushrooms. We'll begin on this side. Now we can begin to divide our large group of objects into smaller categories using what's called a key break. A key break will outline our breaking into different categories. These categories will be based on differences that we observe from whatever objects that we are using in our key. We will continue making these key breaks into smaller and smaller categories until there is only one individual item in each group. This is outlined right now by the black boxes. Once we have a group that is small enough where it's one object, we can then make an identification. Now we're going to use the skills that we just learned to begin to build a dichotomous key for these 6 mushrooms here. All of our mushrooms are going to start together on the left-hand side. This is our broadest category of all the mushrooms combined. Now we can look to these mushrooms for any major differences that we see between them. Some of these mushrooms have a cap, that's the round top part of the mushroom, and others do not. So let's have that be our first key break, is that some mushrooms have caps and some mushrooms do not. As we begin to move the mushrooms to their new categories, let's first take a closer look at the no-capped mushrooms. A great tool for identification is comparison. Do any of these mushrooms remind you of something else that you might find on the island? This mushroom in particular reminds me of ocean coral, and the other 2 do not. So let's make that our first break. That some mushrooms look like coral and other mushrooms do not. As we begin to move our mushrooms into their new categories, we can see that our mushroom that looks like ocean coral is now by itself, where we still have 2 mushrooms in our bottom category. This means that our ocean coral is ready for identification. This mushroom is part of the coral fungi family. All the mushrooms in the coral fungi family have very similar long finger-like reaching branches. This mushroom is called a strict branch coral. It is often yellow and is found growing on our forest floor. Taking a closer look at our non-coral mushrooms, we can see that this mushroom has a really tall cone shape with a circular top. This top is called a spore sac. Inside our spore sac are spores, which are very similar to mushroom seeds. When squeezed, it releases spores. This mushroom is yellow and very squishy and very slimy. When it's squeezed, it doesn't release spores, and it doesn't have a spore sac. Let's make our last 2 groups of mushrooms that have a spore sac and mushrooms that do not have a spore sac. Now that each of our mushrooms are being moved to their individual categories, we can begin to make identifications. Our first mushroom is part of the puffball fungi family. Puffballs have spore sacs that oftentimes release spores when squished. They are usually a long cone shape, or they are small, round, and look like golf balls. This one is called an umber brown puffball. Our next mushroom, which does not have a spore sac, is part of the jelly fungi family. Jelly fungi often look and feel like dropped pieces of jelly on the forest floor. This one is called witch's butter. It's orange and usually grows on rocks. Now that we've identified all of our no-capped mushrooms, it's time to head back to our cap mushrooms. All 3 of these mushrooms look very different. If you look underneath the caps, 2 of the mushrooms have gills and 1 has pores. The gills are the long stripes, where the pores are the small holes that look and feel like sponges. That's going to be one of our first key breaks, that some of the mushrooms have pores and others have gills. As we move our mushrooms into their new categories, we see that the mushroom with a cap and pores is now in its own category, which means we can identify it. This mushroom is part of the bolete fungi family. Boletes all have caps and small pores instead of gills. This bolete is called an American slippery jack, and it's really common around the island. It is yellow to a brownish color and often grows in big groups. There are several differences that we can observe between our 2 gilled fungi. Our mushroom on the left is all yellow, where the one on the right has a white stem, white gills, and a red cap. The gills on our yellow mushroom travel down the stem a little bit, where the gills on the right mushroom end at the cap. Our yellow mushroom has an uneven cap, while our red mushroom has an even cap. Any of these differences would work for a key break, but today let's use color. So one group will have 1 color throughout, and our other group will have 2 colors throughout. Now each of these mushrooms is in their own individual groups, so we can ID them. Our yellow mushroom is in the chanterelle family. These mushrooms are tall and have curled, uneven caps and gills that travel down the stem. This mushroom is called the Pacific golden chanterelle. Our final mushroom, which has 2 different colors throughout, is in the Russula family. Russulas often have a red cap, a white stem, and white gills. They are really common all over the area, especially this time of year. This Russula is called a brittle gill. Now that we have finished our dichotomous key, we can put it to the test with another mushroom that I found in the forest. This mushroom will begin at our start, at our most broad category, and it will travel through all the different key breaks, following the path that most makes sense. Using our observations, does this mushroom have a cap or no cap? Does this mushroom have pores or does it have gills? This mushroom has gills. Does our mushroom have 1 color throughout or does it have 2 colors throughout? This mushroom has 2 colors throughout. By traveling all the way through our dichotomous key, we were able to identify this mushroom as a member of the Russula family. This mushroom began at our start. We decided it had a cap instead of no cap, it had gills instead of pores, and it had 2 colors instead of 1, leading it to our Russula identification. Thank you guys so much for learning about dichotomous keys with me today, and good luck building your own. Bye-bye.